Hi, everyone. Welcome to day one of our Banned Books Week Library Livestreams. My name is Brittany Netherton. I'm the Knowledge and Learning Services Librarian at Darien Library in Connecticut, and I am here with Pornsak Pichetshote. Before we get going, I do want to give a special thank you to Image Comics, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable of the American Library Association for putting this live stream series together. So just a note, our format's really simple today. I'm going to start with a brief intro to Banned Books Week, and then we'll meet Pornsak and talk to him a bit about his experience in comics. So what I want to know up front, I'm going to poll the audience here. Tell me, who are you? Are you a public librarian, school librarian, educator, comics fan, a devoted Pornsak fan, a devoted Brittany fan? Hi, Mom. And also let me know, have you ever had a challenge or a ban at your school or library? We'll give you a few minutes, or a fefew seconds rather, to get those questions in. Got some feedback happening there.
Let's see. I think it's muted. It's muted on my end.
That was me. My bad.
All right.
All right. So we have public librarian, comics fan. Welcome.
Cool.
You guys can continue to let us know who you are. We're going to get started. So for our discussion today, you're going to hear the words banned and challenged. It's important to note that a challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objections of a person or a group, while a banning is the actual removal of those materials. This is a really big deal. About 354 challenges were reported to the American Library Association in 2017, but it is estimated that there might be more than 10,000 challenges each year because most of them do go unreported. And while books do continue to be banned, in most challenge cases, the books have remained available. And that is thanks to the efforts of people who stand up and speak out for the right for every person to read any book they want. So thank you, and please continue to do that. 7 comics and graphic novels have made the top 10 most frequently challenged books list in the last 4 years, and some of them in multiple years. Those are Saga, Persepolis, Fun Home, Big Hard Sex Criminals, Drama, This One Summer, and Habibi. And the challenges for almost all of those declared that they were too sexually explicit. This One Summer and Drama were actually banned in some places, again, meaning that they were removed. In fact, being sexually explicit, containing LGBTQ characters, and having profane language are the most frequently given reasons for challenges in recent years. So now that you have some facts in your back pockets, you can go out later and fight for this medium that we all love. Let's move along. Pornsak, are you ready to give the people what they came for?
I'm ready to talk anyway. I don't know. I'll give them what they came for.
Perfect. So before we get to the meat of things, just a few questions about your career. Can you tell us how you got started in comics?
I have the least inspirational story ever because I fell ass backwards into comics. I started off as an assistant editor for Karen Berger, who was the editor-in-chief of Vertigo Comics, and I at the time was not looking for a full-time job. I kind of just wanted to write and freelance for a while, and I was doing that thing that you do when you're young and start off being a writer, and you're just saying, I'm just going to go without a net and see where it takes me. And then I did that for about 3 months, and a friend emailed me and said, listen, I know you're not looking for a full-time job, but it looks like Karen Berger is looking for assistant editor at Vertigo, and I don't understand what any of those words mean, but I feel like you do, and it seems like something that you know how to do. And I wasn't looking for a full-time job, but I really wanted to meet Karen because I'd been a fan of hers and Vertigo for so long. And that was really the only ambition I had going into that job interview. I just wanted to say I had met Karen Berger and see what she was like in person. And so I did, and that interview went well. And then she brought me back for an editing test, and that went well. And then she brought me back for a second interview, and that went well. And then she offered me the job. And the whole time I was like, I don't know if I actually want to do this. I feel like I want to keep freelance writing. But I justified it to myself, like, I'm taking these 6-month temp gigs to just to get by. The worst case scenario is it'll be like a 1-year temp gig, and I'll be able to I'll be working for one of my favorite publishers and hopefully know what it was like to be on the other side of that desk. And that was really the reason why I took the job. And it's funny because I was with DC Comics for 12 years, and every year I thought the next year was going to be my last year. I just thought like, it's about time to move on to the next thing. And comics is a great place. I mean, any of you who are interface with the comic community, comics is a great place to be. The people are just wonderful, and the community and the industry treated me really well. And so, and it turned out into 7 years at Vertigo. And then right when I thought like I kind of had my fill, not that I had my fill, but I was ready to move on to the next thing after being a comic books editor, Jeff Johns reached out to me, and then he brought me in as part of this think tank to turn comics into other media. And then I worked with him to start the TV division over at DC Comics, and that went on for another 4.5 years. And so it ended up being 12 years at DC, and literally every year I was just like, maybe next year's the year I leave and all that. Until it was finally time for me to, start, telling my own stories and writing, and I did finally leave. But it was tough because DC still is family to me, So yeah, that's my start though.
That's awesome, and a great lead into the next question. So can you tell us a little bit about your most recent work?
Well, the most recent work is Infidel, which I don't know how many people on this stream know about, but it is about an American Muslim woman and her multiracial neighbors who discover they live in a building that's haunted by entity that feeds off xenophobia. And it was an attempt to take a classic haunted house story and really update it and talk about things that are happening today. And for me, it was this discussion of xenophobia and racism and Islamophobia. And in this really interesting time where we're finally having a discussion about race in this country, and in the process of that, we're kind of discovering that we don't really know how, and we don't really have the language to do it because we've kept ourselves from doing it for so long. And in that confusion and the tension and the anxiety that comes from that, I like the idea of throwing something as traditional as a haunted house story to watch the different moves that come out, and using genre in that way that I think I love reading genre, in that it is a funhouse mirror on the world, and it helps you look at the things you think in a different way. And that's it, and that's Infidel. That's the book that's in stores tomorrow.
Absolutely. I was actually going to mention that. So in stores tomorrow. If you haven't ordered it for your library, do that. Buy it for yourself. So Infidel looks at the ugliness of racism and xenophobia in a really raw way. It really, whenever I was reading it, I've never seen anything like that before. When you were writing the story, did you have any thoughts or worries about how people might respond?
I had every worry about how people might think and respond. It was a really challenging book. And I don't think I can undersell how scary it was to write it, because, at least for me, because we're coming at a time where discussions about race and privilege and whether something is exploitation, whether a narrative is exploitation or not, is sort of a hot button issue. And the way Infidel started, because I wanted to read a book that was more like the world that I saw outside my window. And the world I saw outside my window were people of different ethnicities, different faiths, all hanging out, and all those people, because of their different backgrounds, had their different backgrounds informed their take on everything that was happening. And it motivated and it guided all the choices that they made in life. And I wasn't seeing that in the stories that I was reading. Typically, I felt that when I saw race portrayed in narrative, it was either sort of that United Color Benetton kind of way, where like everyone is a different color, different ethnicity, but their choices are pretty much the same regardless of the backgrounds that they come from. Or you had Asian American films or Black literature, and it was very much about that experience. And then it was very much about how their lives and their histories informed and their backgrounds informed their decisions. But I hadn't seen, especially in genre fiction, I hadn't seen one that kind of was the middle ground, which is what I saw in life all the time. And so that's what I wanted to write in Infidel, is characters from a bunch of different backgrounds, and each of their different backgrounds affected their reactions to what was happening, and in turn, their reactions affected the turns of the story, so that their racial makeup wasn't cosmetic. And now that's an easy thing to say, but then to like actually go about and do it, that's kind of where the stress happened, because a lot of it involved, there were certain experiences that I can speak as an Asian American man, a straight Asian American man, I can speak with a certain amount of confidence and authority to, but there's other aspects of the experience that I can't, and that is where the research came in. And research was more than just books, it was talking to people. And I used to joke how like, when I was doing this, I couldn't, it took a while before I could make decisions without having to call up 3 different people just to get, and so many of this, like, you plot a story a certain way, and then you have to sort of take that step back and look about, you look at it through a political lens and sort of see like, what are we saying? What messaging are we putting out? And a lot of times it does involve like talking to other people from different communities and sort of saying like, what is this to you? What is that to you? And just trying to make sure that what we had was respectful to everyone involved. And I think when we have these conversations about race and privilege and all that, we get into the language of censorship and non-censorship and freedom so quickly. But when you're writing, at least for me, there was a much simpler calculus that was involved, and that's just really like, I just don't want to be an asshole. And it's really easy to be an asshole if you talk about people, if you pretend you know what people are going through when you don't actually talk to them. And so that was sort of the calculus, was just kind of like, it was everything in the book was just it was to tell the story that was about the whole point of the story. The whole point of the story is there's a lot of different types of people. Their perspectives don't always jive up. And what is the common ground? Is there a common ground between them? And in order to do that respectfully, I had to talk to as many different people as I could and to kind of get that. So it was a constant source of anxiety and fear that I was getting it wrong.
You wrote in, I believe it was the 2nd issue, about how your personal part of the story was your least favorite element of the entire thing to discuss. And that you wrote about it in that issue saying, I'm putting this story out there and here I am hiding this part.
Yeah.
And so here it is.
Yeah.
Have you had people reach out to you with their stories after reading?
I have. There was one guy who his letter, he was the Matthew, and I'm gonna butcher his last name, so I'm not even gonna try. But it starts with a K, but his letter is in the 3rd issue, and I really respected. He kind of talked about his own experiences with that, and he did it at the most length, and he did it the most cogently. But certainly, different people have kind of reached out to sort of say, to talk about how they went through similar things, which I really appreciated. I mean, a lot of the book, and it's a lot of every book that you do is, you put a letter in a bottle and you throw it into the water and you see what comes back in a certain sense. And so I did not know until I was writing it how much of what I felt if I was alone in feeling or not. And so it was encouraging in a lot of sense. It's just sort of all the different types of people that, who kind of responded to the story and responded to what different characters had to say in the story. And in the process, it's kind of, shown me my own prejudices of like people who I thought wouldn't like it ended up liking it. And that's been a really fascinating, really eye-opening experience to me that I think I'm still trying to process, the people who I would have assumed wouldn't have liked it and yet still gravitated towards it.
I think you just summed up really well the reason that fighting back against challenges is so important, because there are going to be elements in a story that maybe one person doesn't see any value in, but another person could relate to wholeheartedly. And that's a really cool thing.
Yeah. And I think beyond just the framework of books and all that, it is, and I say this because it's an ongoing project sort of in my life too, and I feel like in this certain time that we're at, it's something where we're all at, where when we talk about things like race and gender and privilege, they're conversations that we need to have, and yet they're really uncomfortable conversations to have. And I know personally speaking, I have, and it's interesting, right? Because like I will come up in a forum like this and talk about how important it is to have these conversations, and yet personally I'm very cognizant of talking to a good friend and having a moment where it's like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about what they said. And then I turn away from having that conversation. And I leave saying, there were 2 ways that conversation could have gone if I went there. I could have, it could have been tension with a very good friend and we might not have survived it, or a friendship might not have survived it, or would have changed that friendship, or we might have pushed through it and something new would have come out of it. And, and it's hard to know. And so when you take that uncertainty and that danger and you put it to the context of books and get, you know, it's really easy to sort of see where the anxiety and where, you know, the pressure and the tension comes from. But at the same time, though, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, not talking about it has gotten us to where we are, and it's not necessarily a great place either. And so it does become an hourly, minute-to-minute decision that we have to make of just, you know, to degree how passionately we want to engage these conversations. And it's not something I have an easy answer for at all.
Why do you think intellectual freedom and creative expression is important? I feel like we got a little bit of that, if you can expand. And do you think it's especially important right now? I get the sense that you do.
I do. I mean, you know, it's hard not to answer those questions backwards, but listen, we're at a time now where, you know, where the news is coming under fire and facts are coming under fire, and we have this thing as alternative facts. This concept that has come about. So the idea of discussion, to go back to my earlier answer, like it's a you know, I mean, and strip it away from the political for a second, even on a personal level. You know, confrontation is hard, and confrontation is nerve-wracking, and it's nerve-wracking because you don't know if good or bad could come from it. But only in those moments of conflict can you actually move forward, you know, and that goes for anything in life beyond just sort of this political realm that we're speaking of. So the freedom of expression is the freedom to challenge, and we only grow through challenges. It's something we tell our kids all the time, and it's funny how, you know, well, I mean, as adults, we have less of an option. We have more of an option to avoid challenges if we want, and it is just as true now as it is when we were infants and children, that we grow through challenges. So I think we have, you know, the freedom of speech and freedom to challenge is important. And it's an interesting discussion, and like I say, I'm constantly trying to balance between, you know, this is a responsibility we have to challenge, and at the same time, I don't want to be an asshole. Let's not act like assholes. So and you know, and what is the middle ground between the two?
So censorship, as we said before, can take many forms. It can be challenges, it can be outright banning, but the most underreported might actually be gatekeeping. What was the discussion about comics when you were growing up? Were they seen as bad, good, okay?
So the funny thing for me is that, like, I got into comics. My first job when I started at Vertigo was in 2003, and in 2003 that was when Batman Begins came out and Spider-Man came out as movies, and it was fascinating because I kind of watched the comic industry grow as I grew and change as I grew. Because I joke, and it's not that far from true, that like before 2003. You know, you would always get these articles here and there of like Biff Bang Pow, comics aren't for kids anymore, and that would come up like every 2 years. But yet I certainly still walking around in New York and all that, I felt like, oh, comics were something I hid in my Playboy because I didn't want anyone to see me reading them. You know, it was, you know, and then slowly after 2003, it kind of became cool to read comics, to the point now where, I mean, it blows my mind now that there are people who pretend that they read comics, because that was not a case when I was reading comics. And so I grew up in a house too where, you know, immigrant Asian mom, and I remember my summer of my freshman year of college, I was reading Moby Dick on my summer break, and I was feeling so good at myself. And my mom came into my room and she saw me reading, and she's like, "When are you going to read a real book?" Because in her mind, textbooks were real books and everything else was kind of like nonsense. And so like Moby Dick wasn't even impressing people in my house, so much less comic books. And that's kind of how I always felt, like, you know, comics was never seen as real literature, as real art, which it's kind of fascinating that it's a mainstream thing now. And I think you can see that legacy in the medium itself through the kinds of people that come to comics. You know, it's more of it's becoming less so now, but for such a long time it was more of a sort of punk rock, more of an outsider kind of medium. And it is very fascinating now that we have a generation of creators that doesn't see comics as fringe material, and it'll be really fascinating to see, you know, what stuff they end up creating because of that.
Yeah, very much so. it's interesting to me that, at least I know from my personal experience as a librarian, I still feel like all the time I'm having to say, comics aren't just for kids. Here, take this. It's great. You should read this too. Anybody else in the chat have that happening at your library? Please let me know that I'm not the only one. Do you have any scary school librarian or teacher stories?
I feel like I don't actually.
It's like your mom was right there with
my mom was just like disapproving of everything. She thought comics were just a scam. Like my mother was also the type of person who she would not buy me toys because and then she would lie about them so that I wouldn't want toys. So like if I saw an ad for a toy, she would be like, no, those are just statues. They don't actually move. And I'm like, I have friends who have these things. Like, your friends are liars. They don't actually move. You don't need a toy. So like she did not put much value in comic books.
And so did you ever envision that, I mean, because if you were reading Moby Dick that early on, I definitely was not. That
wasn't reading everything else that early. Literally, I'm behind on everything else though. So
it's so interesting that you didn't start out as a child with comics, and then you said that every year you thought maybe this would be your last year in comics, and now you have this incredible hit on your hands.
I should clarify. When I was a kid, I loved comics. I collected comics throughout. My mother just disapproved of them consistently.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. It was that thing I did despite. It's why my mother brought it up as much as she did, because it was where I was spending all my money. Also because it was cheap. It was tactile. There were pictures, so it was tactile, and because we didn't have a VCR for a long time. I could just go back and reread them over and over again. So there's something that I do love about. I think it's one of the reasons why actually I still prefer single issues over to trades, just because there's something about how accessible cheap comics are and how it can bring new ideas into your brain at a more impressionable age. That's subversion intrinsic to the medium that I just kind of love.
I think too, if you're getting the single issues as they come out, just having that moment, that week or that month of having to wait to find what happens next.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's funny because in my way of proving that I'm wrong about everything, I remember when Netflix came out, and I was kind of like, Netflix will never work because television is that like moment between episodes where you're talking about TV with your friends and all that kind of stuff. And I was like 100% wrong. I was 100% wrong about that. But I love that. I love that, that moment between issues where you're part of that conversation of trying to figure out what that story is. And now with the internet, you can engage in a larger conversation of what that story is. That's what I love about serial storytelling.
Yeah. And just being able to take the time to really internalize what you read and go back and look at it again and think really critically rather than just jumping straight ahead into finding out. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
So why do you think that comics or even illustrated works in general are so often challenged or banned by people?
I mean, I think comics are still seen as a kid's medium. I mean, I think that's one of the main things, and it's not hard to understand why. I mean, most comics that people know, I think, are superhero comics, Peanuts, Asterix and Obelix, Tintin, that's what people think of when they think of comics. So the idea of adult comics involves a little bit more of a stretch in their imagination and in their recognition. And also too, comics are graphic and it's, talking about sex is one thing. Seeing pictures of sex in the society we are in right now is another thing. So I can understand why comics, between those two things, I can see why people have the reactions they do at certain things about comics.
Are you a fan of any of the comics that I mentioned previously that are on the challenge lists?
Totally. Well, the crazy thing about the comics you mentioned on the list is they're some of the best comics around, right? Saga, it's Persepolis, it's Fun Home, it's some of I think Sandman was banned at certain points, Bone was banned at certain points.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
know, like these are like there's some of the classics of the medium that have been banned. So it's it's hard not to be a fan of comics and not to be a fan. It's hard to be a fan of comics and not be a fan of those books.
Yeah.
Because they're just a testament to some of the best stuff that the medium has put out.
Neil Gaiman had a great quote whenever somebody asked him about a challenge to Sandman, saying that in his eyes, a challenge to that material would do more to get a teenager to pick it up and read it than any kind of publicity or marketing or anything else that anyone could do.
That's very true.
So true.
That is very true. Yeah. Yeah, it's always funny. You never know if you hear stuff like that. And you're like, it's true, but you never know if you want it for yourself. You know, it's just like, but also I just kind of like to be liked. You know,
right. So I am going to go ahead. I see that people have been typing away in the chat. I don't know if you...
I can see some. I'm going to tell everyone right now, I have no idea how to use anything technological. So
I'll do that part for you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to open the floor to some questions. I see we have some already. Go ahead. If you have any, type them in. I'll give you a few minutes. In the meantime, so we've already mentioned the trade paperback of Infidel comes out tomorrow.
Yes, in comic book stores, and I think a week later in bookstores.
Perfect. It's getting a lot of really excellent press. I haven't seen one negative thing.
People have been very kind. We've been really lucky. I've been pretty happy with the response.
And then you have an LA book tour coming up.
Yes. So let's see. Tomorrow we will be, me and Joe Henderson, who writes the wonderful Skyward, also for Image Comics, will be at Collector's Paradise in Winnetka. And then Friday we'll be at the secret headquarters in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. And then Saturday we'll be at the Comic Bug in Manhattan Beach.
Wonderful. And then you have a signing at the Astoria Bookshop on October 4th.
Signing at the Astoria Bookshop on October 4th. New York is kind of my home, so I'm really excited to be there. Hopefully, it is happening at the same time as New York Comic Con, so I have a feeling all my comic book friends will not be there. But because New York is home, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing like local folks there. So by all means, if you're in the New York area, stop by because we'll probably do stuff and then go out for drinks afterwards because I just miss doing that.
Perfect. So I'm going to take a moment and read through this chat here. It looks like we have several comics fans. Somebody says that they love Infidel, and he or she is a public librarian. People who have never had a serious challenge in the library, just a few should this book be in the children's section questions. Adam asks, if the number of challenges go up, is that a good sign showing people are utilizing the public library? That's a really interesting question. I do not have an answer for that. I'd love to see some of you librarians discuss this in the chat. Let's figure out if that is true. Somebody says they can't wait to have Infidel in their library.
Thank you.
I can't wait to have it in mine either.
You too.
Okay, so here's one. Let's see. It was interesting the dynamic you portrayed between the neighbors and their difficulty in explaining race in the context of very tense situations happening around them. How do you, for instance, in real life, the chat just jumped right down to the bottom. How do you in real life answer the question, where are you from? As an Asian American woman, people never know where to place me, and sometimes it's hard to not get offended when a stranger is asking me where I'm from.
You know, that's a really good question. So I have a little bit of an out in that question, only in the sense of I actually lived in Thailand for 5 years, so they're not necessarily wrong when they ask me. I mean, that's not what some of them are thinking when they're asking the question, but I can be lenient enough to them to say, it's like, well, I did live in Thailand for 5 years, so it's not necessarily a wrong question to ask. You know, sometimes they will go on and be like, oh, you speak English so well, and then we kind of have to back up and give the whole thing and do the breakdown and all that. I'm getting off from your original question though. In terms of like how to answer the question, sort of where I'm from, I mean, it's a tricky it's funny, I feel like, and I don't think this is just an Asian thing. I think this is a person of color thing. I think somewhere along the way, you get to a point, and this might be a sign of me being older, as opposed, I mean, I might have felt different when I was younger, and younger people might have more pushback against this, of which I admire them too. But I do sort of feel like what just happens after a certain while, for me anyway, is there are certain questions I just leave as gimmies. You know, I mean, one of before I get to the where are you from question, I get people hit the wall of, wait, so what was your name? I'm sure I got that wrong. Tell me that. And then, you know, and my big joke is at a party, if you don't get my name after 3 tries, I just call myself Ed, and then we just move on. But like, I feel like there's a little bit of that going in, where I feel like I deal with a lot of that sort of with my name coming up. And, you know, I mean, you know, there's a certain amount of education I just don't, you know, it's someone else that, like, they need to be doing their own educating on that sort of stuff. And I think it's time to sort of move on. In terms of me with those people. So I try not to put too much of an onus on that. I also feel like too that, like, you know, people will present the kind of people that they are to you. And so if they're giving you that much of a hassle with stuff like that, they're probably not worth, or at least I found not been worth me spending too much time with anyway, and all that. I don't know if that was a helpful answer or not, but there you go.
All right, thank you. We'll see if there's anything else.
Follow up. I hope to be better at
feel free to ask more questions, guys. Can you tell us a little bit about what your favorite thing you've worked on was?
Oh God, it's definitely that thing of, like, your other kids will feel disappointed and mad if you've seen only because it's literally right in front of me, because of other things I've been working on. I worked on a book called Unknown Soldier, written by Josh Dysart and drawn by Alberto Ponticelli, and it was an action adventure book, but it was very much about what became known as Kony 2012, about Joseph Kony and the use of child soldiers in the Lord's Resistance Army. And a lot of that book was part of my education on how political narratives work and political genre fiction work. And it was a really ambitious book in that, and it did very well critically about using the shape of an action movie or an action story and using it to talk about Uganda during, I think, 2008, which we found during the course of making that book, that there was no, in 2010, I think, which is when we put the book out, there was no concentrated piece of information about that territory and that time. So, like, our comic was the most information in one place where you could find about, like, child soldiers that was happening at that time. So I'm really proud of that and the work that Josh did on that. And I also edited a book called The Unwritten by Mike Carey and Peter Gross. And I love that for different reasons, because that's just a book about sort of the magic of reading and the magic of books. And so for different reasons, and the fact that they're both staring at me right now is
so you've been on the editor side and the writer side, and how is the ownership or the pride you feel in a work different depending on what side of that table you're on?
I think it's a good question. There's definitely a sense of ownership and a pride in both. When it's your work, it's I am very self-conscious looking at my own contributions to a work. You know, so when it's my comic that I've written, I'm probably the biggest fan of the art and the coloring and the lettering and all the choices that are it. I can't really sort of see my own writing, you know? It's kind of like being a fan of a portrait someone did of you. Like, I like the brushstrokes. I don't know if I like what it's like, you know, what it's put on the canvas, because that's really kind of weird. So that's what it's like. So I'm really proud of the comic. I'm really proud of the different things that comics have done. And it's easier in a sense to be proud of books I edit, only because I'm more invisible in that process. There's less of a self-conscious portion of seeing myself and my fingerprints in the work. I think when I look at my own work, the things I'm actually more proud of are the responses people have. Like I know it sounds like just a thing that people say when that, but like the people who like take the time to write and weigh in and say they like the book and to really like give to detail very specific things that engage them about the book, like that really does mean a lot to me. Because that I feel more of a sense of pride in that I was able to engage with people I don't know than being able to look at something I've written and saying I wrote that or anything like that.
That totally makes sense.
Cool. I'm glad.
We have a question here. Are there any read-alikes or related books that you can think of that you would recommend to librarians looking to use similar or related titles to help patrons get an idea of what they could broadly expect from Infidel? Or books to recommend to patrons who read Infidel and loved it?
That's a really good question. I don't, like I always see in terms of like, to give you a good gauge of like where it fits along sensibilities, like I always like, if there's a section for Stephen King books, like if it feels like maturity wise, it's around sort of that level. And so, not to say it's nearly as good as a Stephen King book, but like, maturity wise, that's in graphicness, it's what you can about expect. In terms of other books, like I don't know if I can describe something that is similar, only because I think one of the reasons why I wrote it was that most of the stuff that I was seeing, most stuff in there was stuff I wasn't seeing in other books, which is not to say that stuff doesn't exist. It was just I was ignorant to it. So a lot of it is, and as a result, like I almost kind of love the idea of people making suggestions to me in terms of like other things that are out there. I know my good friend A. David Lewis just put a book out called Kismet that I think comes out in stores this month or next month, which is about, there's a public domain the first Muslim superhero is a superhero called Kismet. It's in the public domain, and he did a book about that. It's like the continuing adventures of, and that's pretty wonderful. But yeah, and certainly, I mean, the political horror stuff, I had to go back to find that. It was Jamie Delano's Hellblazer, it was Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Having said that, there's fantastic horror books out there. Scott Snyder and Jock's Witches is wonderful and a big influence in writing it. Junji Ito's Uzumaki was a huge influence. But that fusion of like politics and horror, I hadn't seen other stuff like that there. I'm trying to think. Tanarive Due, who wrote our introduction, I'm a huge fan of hers because I feel like her stories are genre stories from perspectives you don't normally hear, and I have a huge amount of admiration, and I find that very inspiring. But I don't know. But I wish I was better at finding things that are more analogous, because I would like to read them.
I think it's cool that Infidel sort of is living in this space between things that a lot of other comics are touching on, but it is sort of merging a lot of those things together in a way that we haven't seen yet. So you could maybe do read-alikes based upon the horror element, if that's what somebody loved about it, or the the religious element or the societal element. You just have to sort of piece it together that way.
There was a lot of that. I mean, it's funny because when you look at, anytime I'm working on a book, I keep a shelf of related or things I draw to for inspiration and all that. And for Infidel, they're just so disparate. There's horror books, there's books on Islam, there's books on race. There's a lot of nonfiction on that shelf. And so it really is this just huge cocktail of different influences.
Someone says Infidel is pretty different than anything out there, but I am thinking Pearl. Are you familiar with?
Is that the there's a Pearl book that Bendis just started, but I feel like there's another Pearl book that's more of a YA book.
His first issue just came out.
Oh yeah, okay. So Pearl the Bendis book then.
Yes.
I just read that actually. I'm curious to see. I'm doing the math in my head because I get that came out very close to Cover, and Cover was a David Mack one. Pearl was a Michael Gaydos one. I've read that. I'm really curious to see where that goes. I feel like it's so early. It's a gorgeous book. I think it's Michael Gaydos' best art, period. I still don't know where that story is going though. So I am following it though to see one, just because I'm a fan, and two, also curious to see if there are very many similarities. But I do love that book. It's a gorgeous book.
And they say yes. And somebody else is here reminding us that completely unique is great to have too. That can be an excellent selling point. Someone else wants you to know that they think that you are better than Stephen King.
Aw, that's a lie, but I appreciate it.
All right. And also, you are making someone's mother chuckle.
Oh, good. My day is complete.
I was going to say, that's probably the best thing that you've heard this entire chat.
Yeah, seriously.
Because it uses horror to talk about race, are there any particular challenges that you're anticipating? And if so, what would you like people to keep in mind when they talk to patrons about why it's important to have Infidel in their collection?
Wait, can you repeat the first half of that question?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Because it uses horror to talk about race, are there any particular challenges that you're anticipating?
The challenges I was anticipating, I think, so far anyway, hasn't been a complaint. I think the concern when you're taking topical material and using a genre like horror, which can be seen as exploitative, is that you're cheapening the political the content and the sensitivities around it. Now the book has come out and a lot of people have read it. It doesn't seem like anyone thinks that we're doing that, which is a huge relief. And it was also one of my fears when we were writing it. I think when I was writing it, I think, you know, even though I've had this book in mind for a very long time, once Get Out kind of came out, it was a lot easier to talk about it, you know, because before then it was like, oh, even like when I was finding, it was so hard to find just like research, people to talk to for research, because I was telling like, yeah, it's a book, you know, it's a comic book and it talks about Islamophobia and, oh yeah, it's a horror thing. And everyone was just like, what the hell are you doing? And like, no one really got it. And then when Get Out came out, it was kind of like, no, it's something like that. But we're doing it towards this end. And that was kind of like proof of concept or proof of genre that like you can talk about actual things in life, and even things as tricky as race with sort of the horror genre. So that was definitely my concern, sort of. So the concern that, oh, we're cheapening the material by not only just doing it in a comic book because people see it as a can see it as a kid's medium or an outsider's medium, but then on top of that, horror, which can be seen as exploitative medium. Those were there were a lot of concerns. But then I think to that second half of your question, the reason why horror made sense was because, I mean, I don't think there's anything scarier or anything more, like to me, that it is the anxieties of the day. It is the fears of the day. And when I was doing Infidel, I want to do a horror story that was about the fears of the day, that was about the world outside my window. And to me, this is the stuff that is scary. And so much so that I think when it seems like the book works is when people are recognizing, you know, the tensions that come through discussions of race or racism or the acts of racism. That the fact that some of that stuff cuts a little close to the bone, I think is the piece of the tension and the horror of the book that really seems to resonate with people.
I think that's something with banned and challenged books in general, trying to keep one person or a group of people from seeing whatever it is in these materials that you deem as inappropriate. Mm-hmm. There are things happening in the world that are so much worse, so much scarier, that you can't just hide or take off a shelf or pretend it's not there. Yeah,
totally. And I think too, you know, I look at horror and I equate it to sort of ugliness. It is about the taboo. It is about exploring ugliness. And I think, you know, that for those reasons, it made it the perfect genre to explore Islamophobia and racism and xenophobia.
Absolutely. And it's done really, really well.
Thank you.
Very well. So do you have a next creative project that you're working on?
Oh, but I can't talk about it. It's the most boring answer to give. I'm so sorry. I've signed something that doesn't let me speak. I think around this time next year, I think people will know what it is, but I can't talk about it beforehand. I wish I could. I'm actually working on two things simultaneously. I can't talk about either of them, so it's kind of torture for me.
Someone wants to know if it's Moby Dick.
Yeah. Oh my God, that'd be amazing. Now I have to do Moby Dick, clearly.
It's okay. We know it's Moby Dick.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say it's Moby Dick, guys. Let's just say it's Moby Dick.
We're gonna be so disappointed when this time next year we don't see a Moby Dick cover with your name on it.
Yeah.
So INFIDEL got picked up for a movie.
Yes.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
And got picked up after what, 2 issues?
Got picked up after 2 issues, yes.
So obviously you've already completed the run, so will you be involved in the movie at all?
I mean, actually, I'm as involved as they want to make me involved. The way I sort of look at it is that they wrote me a very generous check for the luxury to not return my phone calls. Having said that, though, they've actually been very communicative about how the progress of things go. I am sworn to secrecy on all of them, but eventually, I think sooner than later, hopefully news will come out. But yes, but the way I sort of I just wanted the comic to be the comic, and I didn't want to get in the business of sort of figuring out what the comic book adaptation would be, because I've lived in this story for so long. I think it was time for other people to do it. Having said that, the people, the folks at Sugar 23, the folks at TriStar, they've been so generous in terms of being open. That's been kind of amazing to me. So, I was kind of expecting never to hear another word from it after they got the rights, and that hasn't been the case at all. So I feel really grateful.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that you said that what you really would hope is that the comic would just blow the movie out of the water.
I totally want the comic to be better. I mean, I don't understand people who are I just want the comic to be great. Not the movie to be great. I want the comic to be better. I don't, yeah.
Well, I'm going to unofficially speak for every librarian in the chat. The book is always better.
Thank you.
And so at least you'll have us on your side with this.
Thank you.
Someone just found out about the more.
Oh, cool.
And they would watch that movie, possibly even in a theater.
Ooh, that's quite horror movies are always more intense much more stressful in a movie theater too. Oh,
yeah, no, I will not be seeing it in a theater. I will be seeing it the comfort of my house in the middle of the day with all the lights on.
That's awesome. Brittany, I'm going to ask you to vamp for 3 seconds because I'm down to 7% on my laptop.
Okay.
So I'm just going to plug it in real quick.
Okay. While he's doing that, any more questions that you guys have? He'll answer anything as long as it's not about the secret Moby Dick project.
Yeah, exactly.
Great question, Library Landia. We'll get that one going.
All right, I'm back, and you've all seen way more of my apartment than I'm sure you wanted to.
Come back. We did a lot while you were gone.
Yeah, okay, great. I'm looking forward to hearing all of it.
So dream creators or a project for you to work on?
Oh my God. God, I feel like the dream creators, all of them. There's so many good people working in comics. Mm-hmm. There's so many good people working in comics. The first people that pop into mind are my friends, Jock, Cliff Chang, Jay Lee, Dustin Nguyen, Jeff Lemire, those, there's way too, there's so many good people working in comics. It's hard to just narrow it down to any. I want to work with everybody, honestly. I just want to work with everybody.
If I can say so, it seems like you had a dream team for INFIDEL.
I loved working on INFIDEL with the whole gang. It was great. I think, the thing I kind of loved is that we were all professional. We've all been doing it long enough so that, the first rule of story rules. It was kind of that's kind of the philosophy everyone sort of took. We were all storytellers first and foremost, and there was never a sense of some kind of ulterior motive where, you hear about stories like, oh, there were they were doing this page so they could sell it for a big amount. It has nothing to do with the story. Like there was none of that. Everyone was just about the story, and everyone felt passionate about what it had to say. So it was a fantastic experience, and I work with all of those guys again, hopefully sooner than later.
Excellent. We hope so.
Yes, I hope so too.
So I want to know, before recently, for banned and challenged books and all of that, was that something that you were aware of, or is that something that you learned about more recently?
I think I was aware of it, just because, you know, if you try to stay up on comics news, you'll hear about, you know, banned and challenged stuff so much. And especially, you know, I've certainly been friends with the folks who do the CBLDF, and you hear a lot about, you know, banned and challenges and censored, and just like all the different things, the different ways the CBLDF has helped creators. So yes, I have been aware of it for a while. I do think the definition has evolved and become more articulate, and the language has gotten more precise as we moved along. But the concept in general, I've definitely been aware of for a while.
Nice. If we as librarians needed to pitch INFIDEL to somebody, I know every time that I have tried to explain it to people, it's very similar to what you said just a bit ago, where people are like, what are you talking about? If we could have just a short, one sentence elevator pitch to give to people, what would you think it should be?
The one I stick to, and I think a version of it is on the back cover of the book, it's about an American Muslim woman and her multiracial neighbors who discover that their building is haunted by racist ghosts, or is haunted by entities that feed off xenophobia, depending on how much you want to gussy up the language. But and that usually encompasses, people usually react to that with confusion, or they react to that, wow, that's awesome, and you kind of know where you stand very, very quickly. Is what I found. Yeah,
that's way better than the pitch that I was giving previously. So I'm just gonna have to remember.
Okay.
The sentence.
There is a version of that sentence on the back cover of the trade. So
right, everyone. So when it shows up at your library tomorrow,
exactly,
get it, memorize it, picture with your phone, carry it around. All right. So we are officially about 7 minutes out. No new questions rolling in. So I'll give you a few more minutes to get those in. I do want to briefly go over how to report a challenge if you in your library, in your school, are presented with one. ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom provides confidential support to anyone undergoing a challenge or ban. Support can come in the form of letters, book reviews, resources, talking points, or just emotional support, which is really important, especially if it's a display that is very close to your heart, is very special to you, or if you're just an empathetic person, which we all are. So you can report the censorship online at the OIF website, or you can call, and hopefully somebody maybe from Image can type the number into the chat for you. It's 1-800-545-2433, extension 4226. I feel like I'm on every reference desk call that I receive asking for telephone numbers. So hopefully somebody could type that in. And you can also visit the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund's website. It's just /managing-challenges. And somebody can help out. Shoot it out on Twitter. I'm sure that there are many of us who will jump in to help as well. Pornsak will come.
Yeah, I'm there. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm sure. At any given point, the sure money is I don't really know what I'm doing, but I will be there.
He's gonna school them with Moby Dick.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, perfect. So we've got the number in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing this talk. This has been really fun and enlightening, and it's very nice to be able to speak with you.
Thank you. This was a blast. So I'm really happy to get the time, and I'm really happy to get a chance to, in this way, like talk directly to librarians. you guys are awesome. And I definitely, when I was growing up, I definitely read a lot of more comics because of librarians and libraries. So having this book going out to libraries and having, librarians be aware of the book means a lot to me.
That's awesome. And that means a lot to us as well. So now we're on each other's side.
Yes, definitely.
All right. So we can't wait to see what this secret project is in the future. And we just wish you all the best.
Thank you. Right. And you guys as well. Like I said, I love the work. I love the work y'all do. So thank you.
All right. So thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for your questions. Reach out if you had anything else that you needed answered. And if that is all, we will sign off.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.